If I told you that I bought and sold over $100 million worth of real estate by the age of 36, you probably might think that I must have inherited money or that I got lucky or somebody took me under their wing and just I learned right directly underneath the best person ever. But the truth is, none of those things happened. And I'm going to show you guys step by step how I did it, what kind of pivots I made along the way, mistakes that cost me millions of dollars, and how you could follow this same exact path even if you're starting from nothing. So let's jump into it. Back in 2010, I got my real estate license. Now for me, I never wanted to be in real estate. I actually just wanted to play baseball. During that same year in 2010, I got drafted by the Oakland A's to fulfill my dream doing that. The only problem about getting drafted to play pro baseball was that you have to go through the minor leagues. And back then in the minor leagues, you made $1,200 per month while you were actually playing. So, we only played 6 months out of the year. So that meant that I was making about $7,000 a year playing minor league baseball. And so I kind of knew that that was going to be the thing as I was in college. I knew I was going to get drafted and I knew I wasn't going to make any money after doing so. So I already planned on getting a real estate license that year. Ended up taking the test, passing, getting my license. And now I was a full-on adult. I was 21 years old. I was going to go sell real estate as a realtor to make income. And then I was going to go play baseball as basically my long-term wealth building strategy. I just figured that, hey, if I grind it out in the minor leagues for a few years and I get to the big leagues, that's where I'll make millions of dollars. So real estate was just something to get me by in order to reach my dreams of playing in the major leagues. Now, what I didn't realize at that time was that it was literally the worst time to be a realtor probably in history. These last bunch of years have been pretty difficult with interest rates and low transaction volume and all that, but we have high prices. The prices right now in America are about $500,000 a home. So that means the average commission is about $15,000. Well, back then in 2010, we still had very little transaction volume because we just got through the real estate crash of 2008, but the prices were only $100,000 here in Las Vegas. So that means that the average commission was only $3,000. So it was still the same amount of work to sell the same exact house, but one only paid $3,000 back then versus $15,000 15 years later. So for me, I was over there trying to sell those houses as a realtor. Nobody could get a loan because everyone had just gotten foreclosed on. Nobody had any listings because all the foreclosures were now bank owned. So everything was owned by the bank, basically. You couldn't get a normal traditional listing that you get today. And overall, it was just really difficult. People were really scared. I remember showing a house to a cash buyer and it was $75,000. It was brand new. Essentially, it had been built in 2008. I was trying to sell it in 2010. Back then in 2008, sold for over $300,000. Brand new home in Vegas, 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath, great home. And we could get it for $75,000. You can't even replace it for $75,000. And I remember that cash investor was like, I think the prices are going to keep going down. It's literally what he told me. He's like, I don't want an offer on this because I don't think that this is a good deal. I think it's going to keep going down. And in my mind, I was just like, do you think it's going to be free? What do you think is going to happen here? And, for me, I just remember looking at that specific house and that kind of being the turning point in my life where I was like, wow, this deal is so good and this guy doesn't want to buy it. If I had money, if I could be the investor, then I would have bought this deal yesterday. And it would cash flow. I know it's going to be appreciating. It's brand new, basically. I wish I had money to buy this deal, but I don't have money. And so, I didn't buy the house and somebody else got that house and they got an amazing deal and I kind of was out of luck. So, I ended up going on the real estate side as a realtor for a couple of years. I'm playing minor league baseball. I sell a few houses here or there. And after a couple of years, I just get tired of it. I'm like, look, I'm really good at finding deals. I was always a hustler, but because I don't have money and because these commissions are so small, I just don't want to do this anymore. And so I actually quit being a realtor after just a couple of years. Around that time, I got married to my wife, Mindy, and I had to figure out how to provide. And so that was where my first experience being like a true entrepreneur started to happen. I ended up getting into couch flipping, which drastically changed my life. In 2013, I started flipping couches. I didn't learn from a YouTube video. I didn't learn from Instagram. None of these things were popping off the way they are now. I just figured it out. I had furnished our brand new apartment that we just got married together and got. And I just remember furnishing it with Craigslist and thinking, man, I got really good deals on that. I bet you I could like sell this stuff and make some money. And sure enough, I put the theory to the test. I bought another couch, flipped it, made a couple $100. And that was the start of my true entrepreneur career where I finally had success. Flipping couches changed my life. I ended up making a couple $1,000s the first month. After that, turned to 4,000. Then eventually I was making $8,000 a month just flipping couches. And ironically, years later, teaching people how to flip couches is what launched me off on social media. Like if you look on my channel right now, my highest videos were me teaching people how to flip couches back during COVID, because I just kind of made a video like this talking about, this thing I used to do 5 years ago back then, and it really had helped me out. And I was like, man, I think this could help somebody out if I make this video. Well, sure enough, it created this entire industry of people that started flipping couches. And so, by the way, if you're watching this, it is still a great side hustle if you need to make money while you're pursuing your real estate career. And so that's exactly what happened for me. I start flipping couches. That becomes kind of my stable income. Baseball's not progressing the way I want. The Oakland A's end up releasing me, and now I'm playing independent baseball and all these different things. And then around 2014, I'm 1 year into marriage. I'm about 1 year into flipping couches. Not really sure what's happening in my baseball career. And I'm on my 1 year anniversary in New Orleans. And I remember praying. I was like, God, what do you want me to do with my life? If baseball is not going to be the thing, and, I already failed as a realtor many years ago, and I don't want to flip couches the rest of my life. Like, what am I going to do? And I've only really heard God speak to me, like very clearly, a few times in my life. And this was one of those times. And, I was about 24 at the time. And I heard him say real estate. And in my mind, I'm like, real estate, why would it be real estate? I already failed at that. I didn't even like it. Why? And sure enough, through a series of events on this 1 year anniversary, I see this infomercial about flipping houses with no money. And I'm like, that's got to be a scam. There's no way to do that. I would have heard about it in realtor school. Somebody would have taught me that. And that wasn't the case. Nobody taught me that. They don't teach you how to do hard money loans and wholesaling and all these things that I now know today. But I just was like, I'm going to look into it more. And so I get on Google and I find, this website called Bigger Pockets, and I start getting on the forums and I buy a couple of their books. And sure enough, I realized like, oh, this is real. I just got to find a hard money lender. I just got to go get some private money or get some credit cards. And, if I really want to, I could even get into wholesaling. And that trip changed my life. I went home. I told my wife, I said, Mindy, we are going to invest in real estate. We're going to flip houses. I'm gonna have to max out my credit cards to do this, but we're gonna do it. And she's like, all right, let's do it. And when I say my credit cards, both of our credit cards. God says that when you get married, two become one, and we've taken that to heart the last 12 years. So we ended up maxing out both of our credit cards to get capital. That ended up being about $50,000 worth of credit, and with that $50,000 worth of credit, I was like, okay, cool. I've got enough to put a down payment on a property, maybe even two. I just got to find deals now. And so I got approved with a hard money lender here in Vegas. And, I was like, now I just got to find a deal. So fast forward a few months, I'm making offers, nothing's hitting. Eventually, I get my very first deal in February. And I lock up this property. And I'm like, okay, cool. This is going to be my very first deal. About a week later, I lock up another deal. I'm like, oh, snap. Like, now I have two, and I have barely enough money to buy both of them. I mean, at this point, I'm kind of all in. I've maxed out all my credit cards. If one's good, why not two? And so we ended up buying both of the properties within the span of about a month, and we're off to the races. One of them had a tenant, so I couldn't even do anything with it. The other one was vacant. It didn't need very much work at all. Ended up relisting it like 4 days later. I bought it for $99,000. I got a 3% realtor commission because I was still licensed at the time. So I was effectively in it for 96. Put about $2,000 of renovations into it. Didn't need much at all. So I'm in it for 98. And I relisted at 135. Within a couple of days, I get a full price offer at 135. I remember when I took the offer, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, is this really what flipping houses is? Like, you just get a property and you relist it, and days later, I'm getting an offer at 135. And I don't think I've ever told this story publicly, but what happened was I ended up getting that property, And somebody else offered on it after me, after the seller already took my offer. And so they really wanted the deal. And so when I relisted it, they saw it came back for sale. And granted, they had to pay way more now, but they really wanted that house. And so they offered 135. And I remember the agent telling me that. And so, I take the offer, it's full price. About 30-ish days later, they close on the deal. I ended up making about $25,000 when it was all said and done after paying off the closing costs, my lender, everything. And that drastically changed my mindset, my life. It was the first time I was like, wow, I could see myself doing this for the rest of my life. Like I could be in real estate. Like this is a respectable career. It's not flipping couches. There's no limit to how many you can do. It's something that's going to be around forever. Baseball's limited. So, I think this might be the thing. And so, that first deal really gave me the confidence and everything I needed. And eventually the other one we bought sold. I made about $15,000 on that one. So I was already up 40K. Ended up buying 3 more properties that year. One of them sold. Made $10,000 on that one. So overall I made $50,000 that very first year. All I did was flip houses. Basically all those deals were off the MLS or through meeting wholesalers. And it was crazy. I was like, wow, like if I could make $50,000 just kind of like casually doing this while I'm playing baseball, like let's take it to the next level. So, 2016 comes, I got skills now, got confidence. To make a long story short, start building some relationships and networking with people. End up buying 20 houses that year, all flips basically. And, I don't remember how many of those 20 I bought actually sold, but I do remember I made $200,000 on all the properties that sold. First time in my life I ever made 6 figures. So, at this point, I'm scaling very quickly. I mean, I go from basically failing as a realtor from 2010 to 2015. 2015, I have some success as a flipper, make 50. 2016, I make multiple 6 figures. First time in my life. In fact, made more money that year than I had in my entire life previously. It's insane, right? That pattern starts to continue. So 2017, at this point now, I've flipped about 20 something homes. I get my very first private money lender in 2017. Up to this point, 2015, 2016, I just kept my credit cards maxed out so I could keep buying more and more properties. And they just stayed maxed out because, at that point now I was starting to carry multiple properties at a time because I was buying more deals. Well, 2017 comes and I get my very first private money lender. And this guy actually came from a Bible study that I was attending. And he had seen my success over the last couple of years. And he's like, dude, you know what? I'm willing to trust and invest with you. So he starts investing with me and he does one deal. Then, that goes successful. Then it turns into 2. Then it turns into 4. Then he starts telling his friends. And by the end of that year, I ended up buying 50 houses. And with those 50 houses, I don't remember how many sold, but I do remember I made $750,000. So, basically 3, almost 4x'd. And, once again, made more money that year than every previous year combined in my entire life. And it was absolutely life-changing. And I would say that the big reason that it scaled that year was because of 2 things. One was I got private money for the first time, so I was not limited by my capital anymore. It kind of gave me the green light to go out there and get as many deals as I could. And then number 2, I would also say that, it was maybe July or August that year, I got released in baseball. I was still playing baseball this whole time. And at that point, I was getting overwhelmed between trying to play baseball, flip houses at a high level. And so when I got released, I finally went home and just was like, hey, you know what? I'm going all in on this business thing. I've played 8 years professionally. Like, clearly, I'm not getting to the big leagues. I'm at peace with that. I'm thankful that this real estate deal is crushing. So, I'm going to do that. And, all those factors led to the scale. Obviously, too, I started to make a bigger name for myself. I was posting on Facebook in Vegas, so people started to become aware of me and send me more deals. Things were really on the up and up, which led into 2018, which was really kind of, I think, my breakthrough moment, even though that was a huge, obviously, breakthrough. 2018, I was like, well, this is the first time in my life I am free to do 100% business. I'm not focused on baseball anymore. I'm not leaving anymore, going to different cities and all this stuff and training and everything. I'm just solely focused on business. And so what I did was I got an office for the first time. I hired staff for the first time. I invested into marketing for the first time. And that year I went from buying 50 houses in 2017 to 150 in 2018. Majority of which were flips. We started wholesaling towards the end of 2018. And that year in 2018, I made $2 million. So basically 3x the previous year. I was like on this 3x pace essentially for 4 years straight. And made more, once again, in that year than I had my entire life combined, even with the big years preceding that. And it was crazy. Could not believe that we were making that much money. Couldn't believe that I was that fortunate. But one thing I'll say in hindsight that really benefited me was timing and luck. From literally 2010 when I got into the business as a realtor to 2018, there was never a dip. It was always straight up. So I only knew an up market my entire career. So even when I made mistakes, I never really got penalized for them because, things were always up. But I remember 2018 was the first time I ever had like a serious problem. Even though we made 2 million that year, it led me into a massive problem in 2019. Because going into that year, I'm buying all these houses, I'm scaling like crazy. I mean, like, I have no idea how we were even managing it all. We'd have 70 properties at any given moment. So I was just figuring it out on the fly. Well, the end of 2018, they decided to raise interest rates. So like first time in my career, I really see this and I get to see the impact. And all of our properties just started to sit. And I realized we were having to price cut properties and I'm losing money every month. And I'm realizing I'm not managing cash flow properly. I thought I had way more cash in the bank than I really did because I was basically, what I didn't realize was happening at the time, I was basically commingling funds of rehab and down payment. So I basically had all this money for rehab because I had so many projects. And I thought that, oh yeah, we have way more than enough for rehab. I wasn't tracking it properly. And, I ended up starting to take some of that money and put it as down payments on the next acquisition. And sure enough, once the property slowed and my property stopped selling and, the cash flow evaporated, I started to realize like, oh crap, I don't have enough money to finish these projects. And my cash burn every month is multiple six figures and interest payments. This is bad. When you can't finish properties and you're losing money every month because your properties aren't selling, you're in big trouble. So this was my first time experiencing trouble. This was towards the end of 2018. And even though we made a lot of money that year, we were running out of cash, which is crazy. You would have never I would have never expected that, the P&L would say one thing, but the cash flow would say another thing. And that's exactly what happened to me. And this was my first time really having to figure out a solution. And so I started wholesaling. And I'll say wholesaling is what kind of started to save us because, I had all these deals that we were going to buy, but now I'm like, dude, I can't buy these. Like, we can't even finish the current ones we got. And I need cash today. I don't have time to wait 4 to 6 months for this to sell and make money. So we start wholesaling and that starts to help fix the problem. And so that kind of led into 2019 of my first down year. And it was interesting because during that time too, 2018, I moved into a brand new house, the fruits of our labor. And now the house kind of feels a little bit like a burden because now we're kind of like, I'm like uncertain of what's going to happen. I had also started to do other things during that time. I opened up a real estate brokerage and we were recruiting actively. So I was starting to make money from that. I bought my first Airbnb back in 2017 also. I forgot to mention that. And I was starting to now accumulate them in 2018 and 2019 because they were getting such great returns back then and nobody was doing Airbnb. So I was buying these Airbnbs in Big Bear, California. And so I was starting to build like, let's just call it a more diversified business. Up to that point, I'd only made 100% money from flipping houses. And now I had these Airbnbs that were doing great. I had this brokerage that was being built. We're now wholesaling. I also held my very first ever education event at the end of 2018. And if I'm being honest with you guys, honestly, it was something that everyone was demanding. Like I'd flipped so many houses at that point that people were like, dude, teach me how to flip, teach me how to flip. And I was like, nah, like I don't want to coach. I'm making plenty of money, doing the thing. And I don't like gurus and blah, blah, blah. And I did write my very first book called Flip Your Future in 2018 and, released a course, and the book did decent. The course flopped. I sold one course. I was like, dude, education sucks. But, I was dealing with this cash flow problem. I'm like, dude, you know what? I have so much demand for this. I'm just going to hold a one-day event, $3,000, and whoever wants to come can come. We'll spend the whole day, 10 people only. Let's do it. At that time, I really only had Facebook. I post on Facebook. I go, hey, whoever wants to come to this workshop, come through. Here's the price. Here's the checkout. It sold out in like 24 hours. Made $30,000. I was like, wow, that was crazy. Maybe people don't want courses. Maybe they want events. Maybe they want like true coaching, revolutionary, right? But it was like my first experience seeing like the education space be successful. I was like, wow, that was nice to get that influx of cash when, the properties are sitting, and, it's still not going to solve my problem, but that's good to keep in the back of my mind. So, we go into 2019 now, and in 2019, now I'm wholesaling more, we're being more cautious on our flips. I didn't really push education at all. I was busy building the brokerage and other stuff, and I still didn't understand how to actually sell education. And so 2019, we do about $1 million, and, like I said, my first down year doing this business, and I'm like, dang, dude, that's kind of a letdown from 2018. But you got to remember, like, we had some losses. The market wasn't as hot. A lot of things were at play. I was just busy trying to figure it out. And, but overall, it was still a good year, made money and everything else. And I was also a dad for the first time that year. So I wasn't like 100% focused on the business while, I was dealing with my son, who at the time was in the NICU for 2 months and had brain surgery and, all these different things. And so, 2019 was like a transition year and a tough year dealing with the losses from 2018 and cash flow problems. We got through it. And that then led me into 2020. And 2020 is when everything changed because, we go into COVID and they tell us that basically you cannot, do real estate when COVID hit, right? And at that time, I'm like, dude, we're like on a roll, okay? 2019, okay, that's in the past. Now we're crushing in 2020, and then COVID happens. And they're telling us everything's gonna, go sideways. And, during that time, I'm just at home wondering what I'm gonna do. And this was the next time I prayed, and I was like, God, what do you want me to do? Because this real estate thing's great, but I don't really know, what's gonna happen with it. I could lose everything. That's what the news was saying. And I hear social media. Now, at this time, like, all I really had was a Facebook. I had a little Instagram going on, but nothing else beyond that. And I'm like, all right, well, let's try it. So I start doing TikTok. I start doing YouTubes, and they just blow up. My TikTok in the first year went from like 0 to 400,000 in a year. YouTube, this channel, went from like 0 to 75,000. It was crazy. And along with that, I started to notice the other things I was doing explode. So at that time, I started a tax firm. We just started getting clients like crazy. My brokerage started to grow like crazy. At that point too, now I was making these YouTube videos talking about education. And at the time, the company was called Future Flipper. Now it's Wealthy Investor, which, by the way, if you want coaching, it's better than ever now. Wealthyinvestor.com. We've helped thousands of students. We now give leads, softwares, CRM, one-on-one coaching, events, everything. So wealthyinvestor.com. But yeah, that was the first year that now things started to really explode on all fronts. House flipping had its best year ever because the market just went crazy after COVID. Education exploded for the first time, really. Tax firm exploded, the brokerage exploded, like literally everything exploded, which then led into 2021. And 2021, I'm like, well, let's just do it even better. Let's double down. Let's buy more houses. Market's hot. Let's do more coaching. Let's, do, more businesses. Let's just keep growing everything. And so I focused at that point pretty much all on social media. Even in 2020, by the way, the 2020 was like my year of moving away from being active in the real estate business. Cause I would say from 2015 to 2020, the beginning, that was my full-time thing. I just was like the CEO of Home Run Offer, which is my house flipping company. And in 2020, when I made the shift to being a content creator, I had to like put pieces in place to run that business. In fact, in 2020, we made more money than we ever have. And that was with me like not in it really at all. I got other people to close the deals. I got a COO. Now, granted, what I will say in hindsight, looking back at 2020, was I think once again, we were very lucky with the market. The market went absolutely insane. And so by me transitioning, even though we made a lot of mistakes, we still made a ton of money because the market. I mean, that just is what it is. And you'll see what I mean here in the next coming years because those flaws were shown when the market shifted. But anyways, 2021, more of the same. Keep buying houses, mainly just flipping only. I would say 95+%. Because at this point in 2020 and 2021, I was like, we don't need a wholesale because by holding these properties, by the time we go to flip them months later, they've appreciated even more. And so, we were thinking, oh yeah, we're buying this flip to make $30,000 and all of a sudden it'd make 50. It was crazy. So, we're just predominantly flipping. That year in 2021 was also the first year that I ever started a fund to buy apartments. And so we started buying apartments that year. One thing I will say in hindsight now, knowing that what happens afterwards, like that was actually the worst time to start a fund and buy apartments. No one could have predicted it, but shortly after in 2022, right, they're going to double and triple interest rates. And so apartments are so heavily dependent on rates that it was like the worst time to do it. And, so 21, 21's still an amazing year. We don't know that this is going to happen, but overall, make more money than I've ever made, which leads into 2022. So 2022, it's more of the same. Start more businesses, keep buying more flips. It's just more, make more content, I'm starting to meet people. I'm on cloud 9 until I'm not. So, I'll never forget in the middle of 2022, interest rates start rising. We don't really know how quick they're going to rise or what's going to happen, but they rose them faster than they ever had in history. And so I was carrying so many flips, all these different things. And eventually, we went to the slowest market that I've ever seen. And, at that point, 12, 13 years. And prices start falling faster than I've ever seen in my whole career. I got like $200,000 a month in interest payments. And this was the start of the toughest years of my entire life. Like I just told you, like this amazing story of like everything I touch turns into gold. And then I go through the hardest storm of my life as a real estate investor and as an entrepreneur. A bunch of the businesses that I started during then failed, ended up in lawsuits, pissed off people. And, it was just difficult dealing with that because, I was used to everything I was doing being great and everyone loving it. And so dealing with that for the first time, these house flips that I had were now like negative. And, you got investors and all these things. So, I went through the next year and a half basically on most flips having to come out of pocket to sell the deal and pay off investors. It was a really, really rough experience. And, ended up costing me millions of dollars, cost me multiple millions. I'm grateful that I paid back the investors, but it was a painful, painful lesson. And it taught me a lot of adjustments and things during this time. So, 22 like was still a very net positive year because all of those things didn't like actually sell and hit until 23 and 24. So, on the surface, P&L wise and everything, 2022 is a great year. But as I went into 23, I knew that, I was going to lose a bunch of money on these flips that I had. And so 23, we start making the transition to wholesaling more because we know that we don't want to buy any more flips. It's very similar to 2018. We were going to have to wholesale to get through it. And so, we start moving to a mainly wholesale model in 2023. At this point, I stopped buying rentals because now rentals, at that point, by the way, I didn't mention this, but, from 2017 to 2022, I'd buy rentals in Vegas. I was buying Airbnbs. I talked about buying multifamily and stuff. So I'd buy rentals to offset taxes and build long-term wealth. But in 23, pretty much nothing cash flowed. The rates were too high. The prices are too high. So I basically stopped buying rentals in 23. Plus also, I didn't need any write-offs because I was about to take a bunch of losses. So, 23, taking losses, flipping sucks. First time ever losing money in real estate in 23 because of all those losses. luckily some businesses are doing good, others aren't, have to shut some down, deal with the drama from all that. And, it was difficult. And I would say too, part of 23 was like, just a tough year overall dealing with all those things. Ended up having my third child in 23. And, like this was my first year going into a year knowing like this is going to be brutal because of all the bad debt we had on the books from 22. So 23, we do that. Thankfully, other businesses carry us through the losses plus wholesaling. We go into 24 now and kind of same deal, right? I still had some flips from 23 carried into 24 that were going to be negatives, but overall, clearing the deck. Had gotten rid of a lot of the businesses, started to refocus. And yeah, 24 was a very difficult year as well, just because now it was kind of like everything had reset. It was like, man, I just went through like this crazy thing. What's this going to look like, this new environment? We started doing nationwide wholesaling for the first time in 2024. I just felt like that was probably the path. We changed our entire marketing strategy from TV commercials to Facebook ads. And so it takes time to learn that. I switched my entire education business, which had been an amazing business for many years at that point, an 8-figure business, in fact, per year, to a whole different model. And I'm testing different models of providing services, because at this point in 24, I think that, I think education itself is free. It's very easy to watch YouTube videos and get education, but, going into it, I was like, all right, well, services you're always going to need. You're always going to need software. You're always going to need leads. You're going to need all these things. So let me bundle all that together. And so I spend the year figuring out that product mix and how we can do that for wealthy investors. And so we finally cracked the code at the end of 2024 and absolutely crushes, which is now what I'm talking about for anyone who wants to join. We still have that same thing here in 2025 and going into 26. But basically giving students leads, softwares, one-on-one coaching, events, everything, all in one price. So if you guys want that, you go to wealthyinvestor.com. But yeah, 24 was still a down year. Very difficult transitioning, because I was basically transitioning every business. I was transitioning this flipping business from just Vegas and mainly flipping to, Vegas wholesale, to now going nationwide wholesale, transitioning the entire education business, getting out of old partnerships, dealing with drama, all that stuff, which then led into 25. And, in 25, I'm filming this at the end of 25. It's been a very, I would say, interesting year, both good and bad. On one hand, it was bad because, man, I didn't think it would take 3 years to get out of the storm from 2022. Like, I felt like, oh, in 2022, they do this rate, like, okay, maybe in a year or so it'll be good, maybe 2 max. It ended up taking 3 to really get through it. And then, trying all these different things with new products, you finally figure it out, but then you realize that you reach a certain point where you plateau. And so you got to switch your ad spends and all this stuff. So, I was dealing with that at Wealthy Investor. I had also realized in 25 that a lot of my success in 2020 and 2021 and 2022 was by having a lot of businesses. That's actually, when I look back in hindsight, what saved me from a bad real estate market, was having a diversity of businesses. And when I went all in on just strictly anything related to real estate, like I kind of took the opposite approach, where I was like, you know what? I'm only going to do real estate. I'm only going to do real estate education, real estate investing, and real estate services. That's it. And what I found was I kind of handcuffed myself, because when you're in a tough real estate market, all parts of real estate struggle: services, education, everything else. And so you're kind of tying yourself to this one thing, whereas before I had lots of things, And it took me realizing that to now being in, the end of 2025, we just struck a business partnership. I started this new golf business called Mastermind 19, where we go on bucket list golf trips with, 7, 8, 9-figure people. And it's literally the fastest growing company I've ever had. We got to over $1 million in less than 90 days, highest margins, the best clientele, the most fun thing. I get to golf for a living, start a whole new YouTube channel for it. And it just made me remember, like, wow, I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I mean, I'm the guy who used to flip couches, like I've started a lot of businesses. And I think that maybe I lost my mojo in a way, or maybe I went to too far of an extreme of just trying to focus on one thing after, um, you know, some not working out. And now I just realize, like, no, at my core, I love doing lots of businesses. I love starting new things. And whether they work or not, you know, in the past, I've had more success with lots of things than I've had with less things. And so I'm embracing that. And I've learned that in 2025. So that's been like one of the good things. I think my real estate business is better than ever, you know. So 7-figure real estate business with the wholesaling majority. I would say that right now in 2025, 90% of what we do is wholesale or novation. And we're not going to make as much as we did in 2020, but next year in 2026, I imagine we're going to make more. And there's a very big difference here that I think is important. In 2020 through 2022, yeah, we made more money, but two main things were happening that were different. Number one, we were in the hottest real estate market ever. Okay, so a good market hides many mistakes, like I said. And number two is we were flipping. And so we were taking on all of the risk with the debt and the contractors, which is eventually what burned me when the music stopped. Well, today we're in the worst market that I've seen when it comes to wholesaling. Like I said, 2010 was the worst market when I was a realtor. It would have been a great time to flip or wholesale or even do a buy and hold because of the prices and everything else. But right now, it is the worst time transaction volume wise and prices and rates. Like it's a tough market. And so for us to be on pace to make 2/3 of what we made in 2020 and 2021 in like the easiest market ever while flipping to the hardest market of my career, plus only majority wholesaling where we have no risk and no contractors, to me, that tells me that we have a much better business today. And so when the tide finally shifts, hopefully in 26, we get momentum behind us, we're going to make way more with less risk, like 100 times less risk because we don't have the debt. So, I look at that and I'm like, okay, so on the P&L side, it's worse than the peak, but from like an objective business perspective, it's significantly better. And I think even if the market doesn't change next year based on what we've built and what we've learned, we'll do better in 2020, next year in 2026, even if the market doesn't get better. So I'm really excited about that. As an investor, I'm excited. We actually exited our very first real estate deal in 2025, not real estate deal, our very first fund deal. Very first apartment complex, meaning we took it full cycle. Took about 3 years to go full cycle on one of our deals, and our investors made money once again in like the worst time to ever buy multifamily. I mean, most people who bought a deal in multifamily from 2021, 2022, they probably lost money because of prices and what they've done. So the fact that we were able to make money was like a massive win. And, I'm grateful for that. And, I don't know if every single one that we bought will make money or not. We're going to do our freaking best to make sure that they do. But I will say, considering the timeline and everything, I'm super proud of that deal that we did in 25. I'm proud of the golf mastermind. I'm proud that we're back to starting and acquiring businesses again and being diversified in that way. I have a new motivation to create content like this that's authentic and vulnerable. I got the golf channel. Like all these things happened in 25. So even though financially still didn't make anywhere close to what I've made back in 2020, 21, or 22, I feel like the foundation set this year will allow us to do far better in 26 and beyond with businesses that I love and enjoy that have way less risk, way less headache, and everything else. So I'm excited for what's to come. But I mean, like, that's essentially been my 15-year plus journey in real estate. And honestly, as an entrepreneur as a whole, because they all kind of tie together. What I can say from all of this, if you're still watching, thank you. This is basically my business life story. Subscribe if you want to, if you like it and you want to hear other, trainings and stuff like that. But what I can say with 15 years of reflection, really thinking about all this, is that there is no one size fits all path. Everyone's path is unique. Clearly, my path is very crazy, from baseball to couches to real estate to lots of businesses to golf business. Like, It's crazy. I have no idea what the next 5 years look like, you know? Um, to our nonprofit with Tent Makers too, forgot to mention that along the way as well. But I think that you don't have to conform to any one person's path. I think that that's number one. Have permission to do things your way and with your essentially like creativity and personality and what you like. I've always done things my way. I've watched other people make more money than me for sure and do it in ways that I don't want to do, and that's okay. I'm totally fine staying in my lane, doing what I want to do. So that's number one. Number two, I think 2026 is going to be a lot better for real estate than the last 3 years. So I think if you are brand new, you're entering at a good time. I think if you've made it like through the struggle like me, let me know in the chat if you were me the last couple of years, right? The fact that you're still here is a massive, massive win. I don't want you to ever forget that. The fact that if you stayed through the last 3 years in real estate, when we've had the lowest transaction volume we've ever had, you're a winner in my book. Because I feel like a winner, even though I haven't made the money I've wanted to make, in real estate. And then lastly, if you are somebody who quit during the last couple of years, doesn't mean you can't come back. I think now's the perfect time to come back. I think, for me, when I look at, I quit 2010, I became a realtor, quit after a couple of years. It's too hard. Didn't know what to do. Didn't understand it. Tried other things, right? Eventually I came back to real estate in 2015, but this time as a flipper. I think if you're in that boat, you can come back. And yeah, maybe you got burned on some flips. I know a lot of flippers who lost everything. Okay. You can come back. You can come back as a wholesaler, come back as a Airbnb guy, buy and hold, whatever, right? I would say probably come back as a wholesaler if you're, needing to make money and get back in the game. We can definitely help you that at wealthyinvestor.com. But I think it's a great time to come back. I think the storm is finally past. I think 26 is going to be much better days for the industry. 2027 for sure. But hopefully you got some lessons from this. Hopefully it gave you perspective of what it's really like been the last 15, 16 years. And hopefully it brings you some encouragement and some lessons you can take away from it. So anyways, hope you enjoyed. I will catch you on the next video. Peace.